Welcome everyone to our session on driving strategy at pace. As the name suggests, what we're going to be talking about today is how do you choose a direction for your business, your organization, and how do you get there in the quickest possible time with a minimal investment, effectively. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight into our session. Just a quick introduction to myself firstly, and then Scott afterwards. I'm from Atkins. I work primarily on large, complex change and helping our customers turn a complex vision into reality. So the type of work that we do at Atkins, things like this, we'll work on very large scale infrastructure and technology changes, probably projects that are going to take many, many years to come to fruition and potentially many, many years to actually reap the rewards that they intend as well. Scott, over to you.
So hi, yeah, I'm Scott Fulton. I was the head of digital services with Avon and Somerset Police for just over 20 years, up until last year, when I set up my own company called Digital Rebels. In the police, I was heading up the citizen-facing services online. We delivered many innovative public-facing services there, reporting crime, integration with back-end systems, and also did a lot of work on employee experience. So we rolled out an award-winning intranet that got globally recognized for being so user-centric. Now my company is led by me, obviously, and I train teams to be agile, customer-centric, and high-performing. So it's about more than just agile processes. It's about mindset, which is some of the stuff that James and I are going to talk about today. And also we build digital capabilities. So we help organizations leverage digital to improve their customer experiences or employee experiences if it's an intranet. James. More recently, as I said, the business only really started last year, but already I've trained teams in the Metropolitan Police, Thames Valley Police, and Sussex Police on how to deal with demand and what I call the chaos of work, of knowledge work, where you're dealing with overloading of information and requests for work, and bringing in agility and different ways of thinking to empower teams to be more effective in this complex space that we live in. Great. In terms of the session today, sorry, James is going to lead this primarily, but I'll be giving my perspective, and James and I have worked together in the past during our time in the police.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Scott. And as Scott says, I think our session will give you a unique perspective from two quite different points. You know, most of my work has been around, as I say, big grand scale change, and much of Scott's work has been around agile, fast delivery. And what we want to talk about today is how do you blend the best of both worlds without creating chaos between the two? So to do that, we're going to cover three key areas today. We're going to talk about what's the challenge in delivering at pace? What are the normal responses from businesses? So if they want to deliver at pace, how are they going about doing that? And what are the pitfalls they're coming across? And then at the end of this session, we're going to present to you our proposal of how to blend the two worlds together in the most effective way. How do you bring about the advantages of delivering with an agile mindset, but also being able to accomplish your strategic direction and ultimately deliver value to your customers and create the offerings and the products that you and your customers require. So firstly, the challenge. So in terms of the big picture, all businesses in some way have a customer and a customer experience that they wish to improve. And they improve that experience by providing their customers with an offering, either a product or a service or a combination of the two. And that's the standard model for any business. In providing that offering to their customer, they're going to have continuous feedback. How does that product land? What's the experience of that product? How has the customer changed what they do to reap some reward from that product? How has it made their life better, more efficient in some way? Now, it's that feedback loop that drives change in your business. What products am I going to offer? What services am I going to offer? Which customers am I going to offer that to? And what's the reward from that feedback loop between the two? Now, that change drives fundamentally changes in the operating model of the business. How your people work together, what processes you follow, what information you use, what technologies you use, and how all of that is brought together to provide that product and offering and change and improve the customer experience. Now, across the globe, there are numerous frameworks and techniques that organizations use to manage change in this operating model. Some of them you'll probably be aware of. So Agile, DevOps, Prince2, managing successful programs, TOGAF and enterprise architecture methodology, scaled Agile framework, soft systems methodology. These are all techniques and methods to drive change in your operating model to improve your business in one way or another. All of them having slightly different focus, but all of them based upon assessing what the situation is, deciding how you're going to change your operating model and acting upon it. So what kind of problems then do we see in organizations? Well, firstly, there's a problem about pace. How quickly can you measure and change your customer experience? How quickly can you change the product offering? And how quickly can you therefore change the underlying operating model of your organization? How fast can you run that feedback loop? And fundamentally, in driving that feedback loop at pace, what you're trying to do is provide value as quickly as possible in the shortest possible time. So typically, if you're looking at any change initiative, you've got some kind of investment up front, and over a period of time, you'll reap reward of that investment. And what you're looking to do in any change initiative is effectively accelerate that curve, minimize the upfront investment, accelerate the time to impact, and increase the overall reward. And some of the key challenges in this are, if you are too slow to get your change and your new market offering to your customers, then it's going to become irrelevant. And effectively what you've done is you've lost an opportunity. Okay, you've incurred some opportunity cost. So knowing the opportunity cost is important to understand how fast you need to deliver. Scott, is there anything you want to add to that, to those thoughts?
Yeah, so I can just give a short example. In our time in the police, my team serving the citizen were closely linked to what needed to be done operationally. And obviously in policing, as you can probably imagine, you literally don't know what is happening next. So when COVID happened, we needed to rapidly roll out an online capability for the public to report breaches. Now, we were able to deliver that within 2 days from that requirement coming in. And that was down to a lot of the stuff in terms of how the team was set up, the trust that we had, and the agility with a lowercase a in terms of how we worked. And we're going to touch on that a bit later. But that pace was so important for us to deliver what the customer needed. If we were wrapped up in bureaucracy and having to go to boards and all that kind of stuff, we just wouldn't have got it out there and missed that opportunity. And that would have driven more demand to our analog channels on the phone lines, frustrated the public. So that pace for us was really, really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you hadn't hit that effectively immovable time target, that change would have become irrelevant and would have become costly and caused a great deal of confusion along the way. So the next challenge most organizations face is, if you're driving strategy at pace, then you want to in some way have a long-term vision, a goal that you're trying to achieve. So you can start to categorize, how do I change my organization in terms of operational changes, which might be fast, short-term, reactive, and simple. These are the day-to-day operations of your business. But when you're thinking about strategic change, most organizations are thinking in the terms of slow, deliberate, grand scale and complex, something of the order of 1 to 5 to 10 years and potentially beyond as well. Now, if an organization is too far on the right, then effectively your governance becomes under pressure from this constant stream of change. And you end up getting to a situation where you never realize your strategic intent because you're not fast enough in terms of your delivery. Scott, any thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, again, I saw heavy investment in change resources. I don't like calling people resources, but a heavy investment to the point that the change teams were actually bigger than the doers. There was more change people than the people actually who needed to make the change happen. And that governance was so tightly controlled because taxpayers' money, got to be careful, et cetera, et cetera. But it literally seemed, from my perspective, certainly to paralyze the organization in some ways. And then of course the change doesn't stop. You get national programs coming in, wanting delivering this and just spinning plates all the time.
Yeah. So the change is overloaded effectively with too much complexity. It stagnates. It never delivers on what you intend. And then finally, in terms of challenge, around value, most organizations go through this period of developing a strategy, a business case. They have some form of change delivery window. The change finishes, and then the system or product or whatever it might be becomes operational. That's a standard view for most organizations. That results in an investment profile that looks something like this. During your change window, ideally you're going to reap some reward, but actually it's during the operational window that you intend to reap most reward. But this reward here is uncontrolled. It's no longer under the bounds of the change delivery team, who may have shut up shop and shifted over to the delivery team or the day-to-day operational team to actually operate the system. That gives you quite a large window of uncertainty around how much value you're going to reap from this investment. It may be that you reap your intended value, which is the upper part of the chart, but it may be that over time the value degrades. So you've got this period of uncertainty in how much value you're going to deliver. So how do you go about monitoring that or minimizing that uncertainty? Ideally, what you want to be doing is accelerating this, as I said, to reduce the business case window, to reduce the change delivery window. And also, during your change and operation, continuously monitor what's being delivered and continuously invest. That ensures effectively you're minimizing your upfront investment, shifting the whole graph to the left, you're increasing the overall reward, and you're increasing the predictability of what you're going to deliver as well. Now, in order to achieve that, it's not just simply a case of making your change teams run faster and making them continuously look at improvements during the change window, but it's very much about changing to a continuous change mindset. There's no level of it's done, it's finished. Basically, the whole organization needs to understand that actually what you're delivering can be continuously improved and have those teams in place to do so. Scott, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things I say quite often is it's quite hard for digital leaders to accept that they don't know what users are going to do. And for me, that getting into operational delivery is so vital, because until you get it out there and people start using your service or your product, that's when you really learn. The traditional approach of writing the business case and everything up front is largely based on assumptions, and those assumptions rarely pan out. So it's actually how quickly can we safely get something to market and then do that proper learning, iteration, getting feedback. And so, yeah, I think it's shortening that window safely, as you've said, James, to get it into market, get into users' hands, And then you're in the place where you can actually measure the value, learn and evolve.
So now over to you. Have a think about, how does your business address these challenges? What kind of challenges does your business face? Now have a think about that, and at the end of this session you'll have the opportunity to pose some questions back to us and we'll be able to respond to those. So now on to, what are the typical responses we see across a vast majority of organizations? How do they deal with these challenges? So the first challenge is this one of pace. How do we get this loop, this feedback loop, running as fast as possible? So one typical response is to say, well, okay, so if agile is the answer to this, let's make everything agile. Let's make all of our decision-making agile in some way and scale it. Now, the problem with that is that you can have many, many teams delivering at pace, but if you lose your strategic intent, then those teams can become fragmented, they can become siloed, and effectively what you might have is lots of teams running different Kanban boards, but not actually delivering to an overall goal. The second challenge is that in going through an organizational change where you are changing process and terminology and ways of working, you run the risk of causing a lot of confusion along the way. People have no connection with their original role because of the terminology, the language that you may have used. So it's a little bit like changing the deck chairs on a sinking ship, effectively. You've changed how you're operating as an organization, but you've not fundamentally improved that organization along the way. You've just caused a lot of confusion. Now, one area that I'm sure will resonate with you, Scott, is that when you are setting up a team that is trying to run in an agile fashion, that team sits within the wider context of an overarching larger business. And there are things that that team needs. Now, typically an agile team will require a core, stable operational backbone on which they can host new equipment, new systems. And what happens is that that backbone may not deliver the systems that are required by the agile teams, which makes the overall organization become fragmented. And as we'll discover later, can lead to the creation of effectively shadow IT. Scott, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, as you referenced there, James, we had to build our own cloud infrastructure in the end, because waiting for our colleagues in IT at the time, and we weren't in IT at this point, they were busy in this change chaos that we've described. So no fault to them, but they had so many things on the go. This just wasn't a priority for them. And there was also some fear around cloud at the time. So my team built our own. It was all, everyone knew about it. We weren't kind of doing it off-piste, but that gave us that flexibility to drive at pace. But of course, as you expect, that then built resentment between teams and thinking we thought we were different and special, which wasn't the case. We were just obsessed with trying to deliver that value as quickly as possible. So there's got to be that balance. I know we're going to cover that in a minute, James, aren't we? But yeah, we got there. And it also meant I was in a position that I had trust of my colleagues in the organization to not have to go through a lot of the change processes to deliver. It would have been a very different and very frustrating experience if every decision that we wanted to make had to go through a big board. We just wouldn't have got anywhere. Yeah. And to be frank, I probably wouldn't have stayed there for 20 years.
And your experience, Scott, is not unique. I've worked across many different organizations, and they've seen exactly the same situation where one organization I was working with, they were very focused on large-scale strategic change. They found that they were too slow in their delivery, so they shifted to a very, very agile model. Lots and lots of teams all acting in an agile fashion, which gives you value quick in the short term, but can build up technical debt in the long term, which means that the whole organization slows down. There's too much complexity, too much chaos. So the next point is around, how do organizations respond to ensuring that they meet their strategic intent? So the obvious one here is we are not meeting our strategy. Let's tightly control our delivery against that strategy, ensuring strategic compliance and direction. Now, the problem with that is all change in the business then becomes painfully slow and complex and rarely delivers at the pace required. You've effectively introduced too much bureaucracy. And rather than being selective about where it may or may not be needed, you've applied tight control against all of your change portfolio. One side effect of that is that if you are getting fast customer feedback, that leads you to have the ability to innovate, to try, to be experimental, and for those innovative ideas to flourish. And so if you're too strategic up front, it can inhibit that innovation. And then two final points here are that in the strategic space, obviously, if you're talking about long term, you're potentially trying to decide too much too soon with inaccurate current information or inaccurate information regarding forecasts, which makes it very, very hard to put a contract in place with your suppliers. So you're trying to build in lots of resilience into your contracts, which effectively means that those contracts themselves are so tightly bound that it's very hard to innovate or become agile in any sense. And as we pointed out before, having parts of your organization focus too much on strategy and control can then lead to the other parts of the organization that want to do things in an agile fashion, producing their own shadow IT, which slows down the whole business in the long term. Scott, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it either goes that way, where there's that, well, people just go and do it anyway, or people just don't even bother because they build that view of, well, what's the point of submitting this idea to anybody because it's just never going to get done because it just will take too long. And I've seen that where people just become quite apathetic to actually doing anything like that. It's just, I'll just keep the lights on. They lose their motivation to try and innovate and push ideas forward if they don't actually get anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you said, it stifles that innovation.
Absolutely. And so on the value point that we mentioned before, those organizations that want to be resolutely focused on the value that their organization is providing to their customers, well, they may start measuring things. You know, they may start measuring the NPS score of their customer. They may start measuring what's the societal value that I bring, or what kind of relationships do I have, or what kind of new market offerings do I bring, and what's the overall customer experience of those things. Or you might become internally focused, which is more about what are the efficiencies of how I'm delivering against my people, process, technology, and information. Now, one of the challenges that I've seen is that in focusing resolutely on value, then you start to measure various aspects of the business. And there's sometimes an inclination to set fairly arbitrary targets against those. Like, let's improve our NPS score by 10%. Let's change and map the benefits, which is a little bit retrospective sometimes when you're in the middle of a change program to then say what the benefits are, because much of your investment has already been made. And that can lead in itself to conflicting behaviors. You become too heavily focused on KPIs and value without really focusing on why you're measuring. Where's the trapped value that I'm trying to unlock, and how do I prioritize against that? Scott, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so you can actually go too far as well. And I'd like to think that, you know, I encouraged my team to be customer, citizen value obsessed, because that's, you know, in public sector, that's quite easy. That's who the customer is. Obviously, in private sector, you've got the board and stakeholders and, you know, shareholders. But hopefully still focused on the customer. But there are some organizations, and I won't name any, some of you can probably guess, who are so customer obsessed that can come at the detriment of their workforce, actually. So a well-known online retailer, not naming any names, you know, they're so obsessed with getting that package to you as quickly as possible. You hear some horror stories about the workers actually trying to meet those targets and goals. So I think there's a balance between, making it safe for the organization as well as good experience for the customer.
So at this stage, we'd really like to know, firstly, does your business face these challenges? And how does your business respond to these challenges? Are you responding in the typical fashions that we've articulated here? And potentially, have you chosen a different path? So now what we want to do is bring together those three aspects that we talked about before: pace, realization, and value. How do you bring all three of those together in a most effective way to drive strategy at pace, which is our overall objective? So pace, how do we change our operating model quickly, fast, so that we don't lose opportunities along the way? How do we realize our strategic intent? How do we create customer value? How do we achieve and execute that strategic intent by changing our operating model? And how along the way are we delivering customer value, social value, and internally efficiency-focused value? So firstly, in terms of your operating model, pace layer your operating model. So what we mean by this is there'll be parts of your business that can operate in an innovative and experimental fashion. There'll be parts of your business that are core as an operational backbone that many, many teams require. So these core parts of the business probably have many different interfaces, APIs or information exchanges required of that core operational backbone. So understand, where can you change things at pace, where there are areas that you might want to do things innovatively and experimental, and where do you want to focus on the core. The second point is around just enough strategy. So there's no point going away and writing a strategy that's highly detailed if many parts of your business are operating in an innovative and experimental way. What you want to be able to do is set up the conditions for those parts of the organization to flourish. So by democratizing trust, ownership, and decision-making across your organization. If you are going to create a strategy that is planning out more detail, then have that strategy really focus on the operational core. What's the backbone that I need in place for all parts of the organization to flourish? You need to help your organization shift to a continuous change mindset. And that might be done in piecemeal by small teams at a time, or by fundamentally challenging the organization about how do you interact with customers? What are the product offering and what your role is in delivering that? And of course, all of this goes in the wrapper of what you can do contractually. So if you're an organization that has a large supply chain, you need to ensure that your supply chain can operate in the same way. So which parts, which contracts can you run in an innovative experimental way? Which parts of those contracts do you need to be pre-planned and not have necessarily tight controls over all of those contracts? Think about ones that are most risky rather than those that are, can be innovative and experimental in their delivery. And then finally, around value, don't just necessarily measure everything in your organization. Measure and understand your organization for the purpose of locating where there is trapped value that you can unlock, and using that focus to identify and prioritize change, rather than setting an arbitrary target around increase by 5%, increase by 10%, for example. And fundamentally know the opportunity cost. That will drive the necessity for pace in your business. How fast do I need to run in order to not miss any opportunities effectively? Scott, anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. I think you've covered it. I guess it just looks like the perfect organization to work for. I'm presuming your experience, James, is this quite rare? Would that be a fair assumption to make? So
I think there are many organizations that I've worked with that have taken on some of these aspects. So changing to shifting to a continuous mindset. Yeah, you and I have worked with teams that have shifted their mindset in parts of an organization. Worked with teams on focusing on what is their core operational backbone that will support many different teams. And then working with organizations focusing on value. What I've rarely seen is an organization focus on all of these points. And I think the key takeaway here is that, all of these points are based upon kind of years of experience of witnessing the good, the bad, and the way that things could be done, and really crystallizing those into one set, basically. And it may not need necessarily that you're going to pick off all of these in one go, of course, but certainly give real consideration to all of these points if you want to aim for that ideal organization. So finally, we'd really like to know after this session, what are you doing in your organizations to try and blend these worlds together? So feel free after the session to post those in the chat, and we'll respond to those. And then, of course, if you feel as well, feel free to put those questions in the chat areas, or you can connect with myself or Scott via our LinkedIn connections that are listed here. So thank you very much, everyone. Hope you find that useful. Hope that you managed to take something away that you might go and implement in your organization or promote in terms of how you do change in your business. So thank you, everyone. Scott, any final remarks?
No, just thanks, James, and thanks everyone for joining.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.